Well, hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to our November meeting. I'd like to welcome you all and tell you that I'm Stephanie Tranel. I'm the co-chair with Alana Trimble of Valley's PTO. And it's so good to see everyone join us as we hear from Superintendent Remy and Principals Maxwell and Kuhnert today. I want to let you know that our meeting is set up as a webinar, which is the most manageable and secure way for us to bring you a meeting of this size. So everyone will be able to pose questions today using the Q&A function, and our moderator, Lane Mendenhall-Buck, will either respond directly to you or she'll pose your question on your behalf. So thank you, Lane, for moderating today. We really appreciate that. Before we move on to our first speaker, I just wanted to highlight a few things that PTO has been up to since our last meeting. So for starters, prior to homecoming, our general counsel was able to distribute homecoming tickets to hundreds of very excited students prior to homecoming during their lunch periods. And it was so great to see everyone really excited for homecoming this year. We also pulled together homecoming chaperones for the dance, which is an extremely important job. So thanks to everyone who did that for us. In October, our hospitality committees at Valley and Southwoods put together delicious conference meals for the teachers as they work through conferences. Our directory has been pulled together and will be delivered to schools today. And in December, we're able to continue our longstanding tradition, or not that long, short tradition actually, of providing cookie boxes to our staff prior to winter break. So thanks so much to everyone who helped with those things. And since we are not a fundraising PTO, we do rely on donations to be able to provide these things to the schools and staff. So if you are able, we would really appreciate your donation. We can collect those securely and safely through VHSPTO.org. And again, thanks for taking time out of your day to join in this meeting. And with that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, who I believe is Principal Maxwell.
Check. Thanks, Steph. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. David Maxwell, principal at Valley High School. I'm in my 4th year serving in this role, my 17th year as a building administrator at Valley. When Alana reached out and asked, what would we like to talk about today? The last time we spoke, I believe I was speaking to the social emotional learning competencies and how that was going to be introduced at Valley. I decided today that I wanted to share a little bit about school culture and climate. And I think that this is something that isn't necessarily on everybody's radar, but it's something that I just wanted to share with you, some of the insights and some of the things that we think about, that we deal with, that some challenges to our culture and climate that we just as school leaders have to navigate on a daily basis. And I don't want this to be the Dave show. Mitch, at any point, feel free to jump in and share maybe some insights from your building as well. So in thinking about today, I wanted to first of all just reference and quickly define culture and climate. So first of all, I just want to share, this is one of my favorite books, School Culture Rewired. And this book just very succinctly defines culture as a school's personality and climate as its attitude. So whereas attitude, a climate, that can be something that you can do some immediate things and make some adjustments and change the climate of a building. And I'll give you a quick example. We have implemented a new tardy policy at Valley High School. We noticed that after the last bell rang, indicating the beginning of a period, we still had a lot of students in the hallways, just kind of taking their time getting to class. This was something that was brought to our attention. We saw it with our own eyes as administrators, but also the frustration that teachers were having with kids walking into a class 5 minutes after the bell rang, after instruction had started. So we felt it was our duty and responsibility to, first of all, let kids know that the first 5 minutes is very, very important, that oftentimes the learning target is covered and the teachers go over what that's going to take place during the day. So we put this policy in place. And it has really changed the climate at Valley High School. Our hallways are a lot less full after the bell rings, and you really see kids making an effort to get to class on time. We believe that that's important because at students' jobs, when they become employed after they leave here, that sense of responsibility, making sure that you are being where you need to be at the time you need to be there. It's a very important quality and trait. So again, culture is the personality, climate is like the attitude. When we think about Valley High School, next thing I want to do is just share really quickly the West Des Moines Schools mission and shared vision. The mission statement simply says, working in partnership with each family and the community. It is the mission of the district to educate responsible, lifelong learners so that each student possesses the skills, knowledge, creativity, sense of self-worth, and values necessary to thrive in and contribute to a diverse and changing world. Okay, so that's the mission statement of our schools. The shared vision simply says the West Des Moines Community School District will be a caring community of learners that knows and lifts every child. We will inspire joy in learning. Our schools will excel at preparing each student for his or her life journey. So, those two statements are so important because that really does give us the target as a school leader as to what kind of a school experience do we want our kids to have. So the goal, of course, first of all, have a learning environment which is safe physically, emotionally, culturally, socially, and also politically. Have a learning environment which supports and knows each child. Have a learning environment where students believe they can experience success, and have a learning environment which provides high quality learning experiences. Unfortunately, not all students have had positive experiences in schools. And it can be due to a number of reasons. But sometimes school can be viewed as a hostile place, as an unfriendly place, as an uncaring place because of prior experiences, possibly in another school district, possibly in a classroom. It doesn't, there's so many different reasons. But at Valley, we strive to have a learning environment where kids believe they can have a positive educational experience. And I like to say this, as soon as they walk in the doors. As soon as they walk through the doors, they believe, yeah, I can be successful here. Okay. So where are we? Or even differently, or who are we? So every single day, parents send their kids to us to educate them. And there's this unspoken trust that our kids will experience truth, fairness, dignity, and engagement when they arrive at school. And so part of Valley's culture, we've always had this, a strong focus on the 4 A's: academics, the arts, activities, and athletics. And recently, we've introduced a new component to our culture, which is what I like to call the Valley Standard. And the Valley Standard simply is the belief that we set the standard when it comes to the 4 A's. So we set the standard with academics, with the arts, with their activities, and with athletics. And, I'll tell you, in the 17 years that I've been here, I feel like we're still running strong. In my SMORE that I send out, Valley High School was rated the best high school in Central Iowa. And that's amongst all classes of schools. So 4A, 3A, 2A, 1A. It's about 30 schools from Des Moines, the suburbs, and also some of the rural areas outside Des Moines. So for the last, 2 of the last 4 years, we were identified as the best school. So what's the challenge? Well, the challenge is that schools are simply a microcosm of society. Now, the main difference is students are, for lack of a better word, forced to cohabitate, be in the same space at the same time, whereas in society, outside of work, we have more of an opportunity to choose with whom we wish to associate. Schools and society, is so diverse in so many ways. You know, there's racial diversity, there's religious diversity, there's socioeconomic diversity, values and beliefs that people have, and also I've seen it now more in the last year and a half than I've ever seen is that political diversity. And that diversity exists every single day within our building. So then the question is, how do we create a learning environment which supports every student, taking all that diversity into consideration? And then how do we maintain our culture of excellence in the midst of change? And I'll tell you, the last 18 months, as I mentioned before, you know, we experienced during the 2020 school year, COVID, as well as a racial awakening almost in our country with the protests around the George Floyd situation. And then also thinking about last year with the election, the political climate and how charged it has become. So again, the question is, how do we maintain our culture of excellence in the midst of change with all the diversity that we have in front of us? When we think about our classrooms, there are three relationships which take place in the classroom: the relationship between the teacher and the content that they're teaching, the relationship between the students and the content, and then the relationship between the teacher and the students. You know, there's a fun question: is which drives what? What's the driver in those? Also in our classrooms, we are doing our best to measure what we call the essential life skills. And if you think about what those words mean, essential is just simply so important. Life skills around collaboration, communication, continuous learning, critical thinking, and professionalism. We so believe that these life skills are so important for all of our kids to have. So in our classrooms, again, we think about those three relationships as well as those essential life skills. In every other space, what I mean by that is in the hallways, in the cafeteria, in our offices, in the media center, every other space outside the classrooms. And even if you think about it, like at sporting events, at concerts, places where our kids gather and congregate, we have the tradition of the tiger, and that is that respect, the responsibility, and the kindness. And these are very important, that we believe these are the positive behaviors that we are promoting within our building to help our kids experience more in terms of those essential life skills. And then again, this year we have introduced also the social emotional competencies around self-management, self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills. Because as a parent myself, I had two graduate from Valley. I have one up here right now. I know what kind of skills are necessary for them to engage in the world after they graduate. And we know what's important for them to be able to do. That's what we try to do at Valley, as well as prepare them within the content of each classroom, what they need to do to be able to be successful. Now, for me, it comes down to one word: relationships. And knowing each student, what their strengths are, what their areas of growth are, where they are successful, celebrating them when they are successful, teaching them if there happens to be a poor decision made. So I hope that is not, I hope you feel like this was an engaging little spiel I want to share with you, but it's, you know, this is something that we take extremely seriously as school leaders, is the culture and the climate within our buildings. Again, it's bringing society into our building and helping them make the necessary choices and good decisions to help them be successful after they leave us. So, Mitch, did you have anything that you wanted to add? I don't want to monopolize this by any means.
Well, David, I don't know that I have anything to add, but you know, every building has their unique system, so and situation, and so at Southwoods, you know, we're challenged to be the kind of the catalyst of the high school experience as a single ninth grade building, where we bring the two junior highs that had their own separate experiences together to try to launch them into a more high school mindset. And I will tell you that that takes a while. And David's point about relationships is critical. We know that, you've seen, if you're a Southwoods parent, you've seen that, we have our challenges from time to time. And those challenges have revolved around many of the political statements and the equity work that's being done and the work that continues to be done and the learning that still has to take place with our adults and students alike. What I get excited about is that, I know that I hate having to send messages home that anything negative happened at school, but we've had to do that a few times to let our families know where we're at. But the good news is that, as David pointed out, we have components in place that we've worked really hard to try to get back out ahead of things. If you really think about where our students came from, they have had about a year and a half of really probably interacting socially, mostly online. And to be face-to-face again and to have some expectations, it's taken some time to get all of us back up to speed this year. The pieces that we put in place, both at Valley and Valley Southwoods, is specific social emotional learning. Every grade level has their own learning targets that they have to hit for that. But those are the components that we have built into place into our daily schedule on Mondays for Valley Southwoods, as well as Tuesday can be used for social emotional, or it can be used for educational purposes. Currently, we have some requirements around digital citizenship as well. And so at Southwoods, Monday is dedicated to social emotional learning. The Tuesday advisory has been alternating back and forth between digital citizenship, and we have about 12 lessons that we run our students through. And that truly is, how to navigate social media. What does my online profile look like? Talking through some of those things that our 14 and 15-year-olds need supporting because they think they have it figured out. Yes, they know how to use the tool, but the things that they put out there are going to impact them possibly now and into the future. So those are some key learnings that can't happen fast enough, but they, in our world, they're happening on Mondays and Tuesdays in our space, as well as giving them an opportunity to explore some other interests. On our Tuesday days, we alternate between digital citizenship and right now what's something called Access. Access is where we've asked our teachers to bring their interests into the building and or opportunities for counselors, administrators, folks that maybe don't have an advisory built into the school week to be able to still interact with our students. I've done some mental health training in the past with teachers. I've done mental health training with our students, offered that through an Access. It could be something as silly as, at one of my side jobs as a mobile DJ in my weekend business. And so there are many kids that want to learn about that aspect. And so we can offer an Access just around our interests. So it's a little bit of an opportunity to explore outside of the academic arena, which I think is really important for our kids to help feel engaged, connect with adults, find an interest that an adult has that I also have that starts a new dialogue. So all of those things take time, but all of those things are definitely a focus in both of our buildings. And kind of as David said, we go through our ups and downs. And for Southwoods in particular, it really is the personality of the class walking in the door. And so we have to like really quickly figure out, okay, where are we at? What are the needs? What are we going to do? How do they come together as two classes from 8th grade now to their high school cohort that they'll be with for the rest of the 4 years? So that's kind of where we spend our time. And I'm grateful that our district has really cut out the social emotional learning time and the advisory group. We will actually be coming up here before we get to our winter break, kind of doing what we would call a connection survey, and asking our students straight out, like, do you have, rank 1 through 4 adults that in your building that that you could go talk to make sure that everybody is feeling like they've got somebody that they're connected to. We really lean heavily, obviously, on our counselors. We lean heavily on our advisory teachers to make those connections. And we want to get a sense of how that's happening. Some information that's coming also for both David and myself, and actually all of our buildings, this year was the first year that we piloted the panorama student survey that also explores a student's wellness, I guess, both academic and social emotional, to see how they're fitting into school. And that information should be coming kind of mid-November here. We don't have the results of that yet, but it will be coming soon. So some new tools for us data-wise that we can look and dive a little bit deeper into the health of our student body. So those are the things that I wanted to share. And again, for us, my teachers, it is an undertaking to be able to dialogue about these topics as well as their content and curriculum that they always have. We've put a calendar together. And so if that was something that a parent were ever really wanted to know, like what is the dialogue that's happening in those, that's something that we could share with you, because we have that outlined for our teachers, and we can even share the lessons that are designed around those topics. And I know David at Valley High School has a very similar setup with how they're operating as well. So that's kind of us, but let's, I don't know if Lisa needs to talk yet, and then go to some Q&As possibly.
Could I ask the question of David? And I'm not sure what the policy is. You had talked about, David, Mr. Maxwell, the tardy, changing to the tardy policy. And my understanding from my daughter, Lily, who's a junior, who would never be late in her professional career, trust me, because she wants to be 5 minutes early to everything. However, and then there's also been maybe a change, am I correct, that she has said where you're not supposed to use the restroom near the beginning nor the end of the class period? Is that a change? That's what she has indicated, that is also a change. And is that, first I'll find out, is that correct? That they're not supposed to be leaving to use the restroom during the beginning or near the end of the classroom period?
Yes. So when this was first introduced, we said first 10, last 10, because oftentimes what would happen is students they would come to class with maybe 30 seconds to go, and they would say, "Can I go to the bathroom real quick?" And then they would show up 10 minutes later. Or within a minute of the class starting, they would ask to use the restroom. Now, I had my principal's advisory council meeting last Wednesday, and this was actually brought up. We were having a conversation around the tardy policy, and they said that, especially when they're going from a greater distance, from maybe building 3 to building 1
to the science wing, and you can get there in 5 minutes carrying your 40-pound backpack.
Right.
Traffic,
so that,
alone use the restroom.
So the compromise was said, maybe we can do first 5, last 5. And so I said, you know what? Let me talk to my department chairs and the teachers about this. And this is something I think is very reasonable to do. Instead of first 10, last 10, maybe first 5, last 5, because again, the goal is to get everybody in the room at the beginning of the classroom so we can go over what needs to go over. Once the lesson has officially begun, whether it's independent reading or lab work, and the student has to quickly go to the restroom, then they would be able to do that.
What if it's a testing day? I mean, the challenge is she doesn't want to miss out on instructional time or a test time or something like that. And yet I don't want her to get a bladder infection because she's holding it for a whole block period because she doesn't want to miss out on what's going on. And yet she, can't, that's just a concern that she had with that, because she's not going to take 10 minutes, or females who maybe it's right at the beginning and they start, have something where they have to take care of their female things that you need to deal with. And you cannot, it's not always by a structured time where you can say, oh, I'm going to plan this for right now. And, in 10 minutes and then all of a sudden your clothes are a mess or whatever, or you have a bladder infection or something like that. It's just, and I understand that you're dealing with a large student population.
Right. And emergencies like that.
So there are some classes where it's easier to, in the beginning or the end, do that versus others where,
Sure.
But that was just, then I told her that I would bring that up because it's something that was a concern of hers, because she cares so much about her academics, and she would be very professional, would never show up late to work in her job. But normally you don't have 5 minutes to get from one, and in your workplace, you usually don't have a set time where you're allowed, unless you're a teacher, which I don't know how teachers do it, where you can, especially where you can only use the restroom at certain times.
Sure. No, Liz, I hear you. And again, the rule is kind of the overarching rule. But, in emergency situations, there's always the opportunity for us to make exceptions. We don't want anybody getting sick, any bladder infections, anything unfortunate happening. So again, when in those emergency situations, absolutely, we will definitely work with the students.
So I can tell her she won't get in trouble.
Yes.
If she needs to. And there's other parents I know who have had a similar situation where their children want to follow the rules. They don't want to try to be trouble and stuff. However, they still have to be, if you want them to be professional and be responsible and have their social and emotional, part of that is knowing their own body. And when things need to happen. So there are certain times. And if they really want to make sure they're not missing out. I remember a time from elementary where she got all the way home. I'm like, what do you rush? We lived a block from the school, from Clive. She said, I have to go to the bathroom so bad. I said, what? She said, well, I didn't want to miss out. So she didn't go to the bathroom the entire day because she didn't want to miss out in first grade class. It's not like, that it's not like all kids are trying to hang out in the bathroom for 10 minutes. They're,
Right.
And Liz, you're kind of hitting on some things that so I had a policy, we adjust our policy, and I'll go through mine real quick too, just to kind of piggyback that remember, these policies aren't going after the kids that are doing the things right. And please know, we're still educators, and we know that there's things that happen. And if those kids are going to come up, have a conversation with that teacher, get the excuse, get the permission that they need. Southwoods, similar scenario, we don't have the 5-5, but we went to a school-wide Google form checkout, and which caused some stress with people. And I had some misinformation out there that they can't go. Not at all. Kids can go, but what we're doing is we're monitoring for families, for some of our families, like, did I have a student that missed large chunks of time? So there's an electronic form that all our teachers use to sign in, sign out. And so if a parent really asks us, like, hey, is my student leaving classroom a lot? We would actually be able to answer that question very specifically. Like, yeah, they left every period of the day throughout the day. But the good news is they were only gone for 3 or 4 minutes. And that's possible. That could happen for any student for any reason on a given day. The one adjustment that we made that has kind of changed our hallways a lot is we said, yeah, you can sign out, but you can't take your phone with you. You got to leave your phone here. And that has reduced the amount of time that our students have left the room, gone for 10 minutes. And they said they hand it into the teacher when they go, they come, they do their thing, come back. So I had some information out there that some of the students must have told parents that we're not allowing them to leave the classroom at all. Absolutely not. There's a sign out process that you go through so that we know if you had left and signed back in. And we've just had our teachers saying, you got to leave your phone. And you'd be amazed at how that has drastically reduced the amount of time that our students are out of their classrooms. So we're always adjusting, right, to try to meet a problem area. And so you're always kind of trying to process through, like, what could we do to help support this?
With the sign up thing that you're talking about, does that add more for the teachers to do, or is that not a very big? Because I would hate, when you have teachers.
Yeah. So there's two ways. A student can walk up to a QR code in the classroom, they QR code it, and they put their information in of where they were, and the same thing when they come back. Or all of my teachers have it linked on their Canvas page. So when a student says they got to go, it's on the resource. Get in there, type it in. You got to go if you don't have your phone. And you still have to be. I had some people say, well, if they don't have their phone, they can't go to the bathroom. Nope, that's not true at all. They can sign out. Everybody's got it linked into their Canvas page. So it's just a Google form. So really, it's nothing that the teacher does. It's actually the data comes to our student support service team to say, hey, do we have somebody that's really missing a large chunk of time, or they're gone for 10, 15 minutes at a time every class period? So we can answer those questions a little bit more effectively now.
That makes more sense. That makes sense. So.
We have a couple of good questions here in the Q&A. If you don't mind me just jumping in to make sure we get those covered, and it will be a good segue to Dr. Remy, because I think I'll read the question and have her start the answer at the district level, and then transition back to some feedback from Valley and Valley Southwoods. So one of the individuals watching was asking about just the level of inappropriate speech or racial homophobic slurs that might be happening at the building level, and what our district policy is regarding discipline of what they were terming as verbal harassment. And then what's our long-term plan to help educate students on acceptable behavior? They referenced, in the corporate world, they may have compliance training. So what does that look like for our students here in the district?
Yeah, so thanks, Lane. I'll start at the policy level, and then both David and Mitch can really talk about how that looks at a building level. But so when I read that question, two policies quickly came to my mind. Policy 5, both of these policies are in the 500s, and the 500 policies are all student related, and you can find all of our policies online under board if you want to go read them in detail. But so policy 50301, that is our just general discipline policy. And that, when you look at that, it covers all sorts of behaviors. And then dependent upon the behavior could depend on what consequences there are. And then anytime you think about policies, while they are somewhat black and white, they are also, when they get at the building level, we have to look at them on a student by student case. So for example, what I mean by that is, let's say we have a student who hits another student. And so, we get a fight. Typically it's a 5-day out at the high school level, since we're at high school. But if we start seeing where a student has multiple, so that's the first offense, then it's a progression. So when you look at policy 50301, you'll see a progression from a warning all the way to the possibility of expelling a student. So expulsion means, we remove a student from our system for quite a period of time, could be up to a year. So it just really depends on the severity of the issue. And I guess I'll say the record of the student, meaning, is it a first offense, second offense, third offense, etc. The other policy that comes to mind when I read the question was policy 50202, which is it's a longer policy than this, but it's generally our bullying and harassment policy. It has a much longer title. And in that, again, it ranges from a warning if it's a first offense and a low level type bullying or harassment, all the way up to where we could remove a student from our system, whether that be a suspension or expulsion. So that's really that high level from a district perspective. And before I turn it over to David and Mitch, I won't spend a ton of time on this, but I will tell you that we have seen more challenging behavior this fall, this school year, across our system, from preschoolers all the way to our seniors. And we're not the only ones. When I go to state meetings, I'm hearing this across the state of Iowa, that the behavior from kiddos this year has just been more escalated than in the past. And so, as David mentioned about the essential life skills, we have a PBIS, so positive behavior intervention supports, is something that we district-wide talk about. So we really needed to think differently this year about how do we teach kids, no matter if it's at the elementary, middle, or high school level, what's the appropriate behavior? And then how can we reinforce that positive behavior so that there are fewer negative or those challenging behaviors that we're seeing? And then how do we tie that into the professionalism and those essential life skills as well? So really teaching students about that. And sometimes it is even connecting to our social emotional piece that we are going down that path this year, because students need to be able to identify those emotions, and then what are some appropriate responses to those emotions? Because we all know that over the last 18 months to 2 years, the pandemic has impacted all of us, but just differently. So the trauma that I may have realized from the pandemic might be very different from another, whether it's adults or students. We're thinking about that across our system. So yes, we've definitely seen that challenging behavior. We've been talking and problem solving and trying to determine the best next step to support students and staff, and also make sure that students and staff feel like we still have, our buildings are still a safe place, because that's most important. It's a safe, can't learn if we're not safe, right? If we're not feeling safe, it's hard to learn. So making sure that we know we have these policies in place, and at times we're needing to put those into action. So I'll be quiet and let David and Mitch talk about the building level piece of that.
I think this is a perfect example of the challenge of creating and maintaining a safe school environment where that climate and culture is healthy. And I'm going to be really honest here. I am a co-facilitator on the planning team for West Des Moines Community Equity Conversations. And this is a group that's been together for about 6 years. And we basically bring we create a space for the community to come together and have conversations around race, around equity, around bias, around diversity, because sometimes these topics can get really tricky and sticky, and they're not easy to have, especially if you're not used to having them. Oftentimes we kind of find ourselves in this like, are we supposed to be talking about this, or is can we have this conversation? And I'm just going to, I think that this is a safe space, and I'm just going to share with you part of that challenge. Part of the challenge, and here's a perfect example, is use of the N word. When we talk about society, and if anybody has any kids that listens to hip hop music, one of the things that really drives student identity and adolescent identity is the music that they listen to. And current hip hop, my daughter, she listens to it. And sometimes I just like to hear, what's the new music out right now. This word is said so prolifically and so often in the lyrics that our kids are listening to. And, oftentimes some of our kids who are African-American, they use the word term almost like as a term of endearment, as in a friend way. And they feel that this is an appropriate use of the word. And a lot of it comes down to shared experiences. Whereas, you and I can use the word because we're of the same culture, the same background, the same race. And oftentimes I've even heard, African-American students maybe even using this word towards other races in a term of endearment type of way, which creates confusion, because now all of a sudden it's like, well, you're calling me it, you're my friend, can I call it back to you? And then all of a sudden, if somebody says it, then, you can't say it. The other layer to this is if we use language in our classrooms in an educational context. The question is, should these words have any presence in our classrooms? Because the best way to describe it is that they're triggers. It doesn't matter how you say it, doesn't matter what use you say it, doesn't matter in the example or in what context. Just the word itself is a trigger. And it can be a homophobic slur, it can be a racial slur, it can be anything. So then the question is, where do we navigate this space? How do we teach kids time and place appropriateness for language? And so that was actually one of the conversations that we had as district leaders. And this is what Dr. Remy was referring to was, should there be a specific policy around this? We felt like the policies that we have in place right now do speak very well to the use of inappropriate language in our schools. And the question is, when it's brought to our attention, we have to look at all of those nuances, and how is the word being used? And I've gotten to the point where if it's offensive, it has no place in our schools. And that's how we have to start teaching our kids is if the word or the language is offensive to somebody, to anybody, then we need to try our best to eliminate it from our schools. And again, if you want to use words when you're with your friends or in your cars, at parties and homes, that's where those words need to be used. In school, where you bring together people from all different backgrounds and experiences, and if there's language which is offensive, then that needs to stop and it needs to be eliminated. So And again, that's just one aspect of that culture and climate piece that as school leaders, we're always having to navigate and try and move forward with our best foot to, again, ensure that all of our kids feel supported and all of our kids feel that this is a place where they can be successful. I hope that answered the question. Mitch, I'm not sure if you had anything that you wanted to add.
David, it's a great answer. And like I said, from my personal experience, David and I, being of different backgrounds as well, have to approach the conversation differently. Those of you that know from my building, like I said, I got in a situation where I was dialoguing with a student about all the things that David just talked about. And it was recorded and spliced and sent out and made it look really bad that I had used the term. And I recognized that caused, in our building, a dynamic where we had to do a lot of rebuilding, recovery with those folks because it was a trigger word. It wasn't intended to hurt. We were truly talking about the dynamic of our own culture in our hallways, but got shared in a very negative light. And that's one thing that's happening in at least in my space. Social media, kids are taking other kids' things, dubbing different sounds over it, getting them in trouble, saying they said this when they didn't say that. And that's really at Southwoods this year is what we've really tried to navigate. And it seems like it's been improving. I have to say, since the start of the school year to where we are right now, we've improved, but it has taken a lot of conversations. And to be honest, they're tough conversations with kids because sometimes they want to dialogue. And at 14 and 15, some are ready, others aren't yet. And they're still, maybe using things and using terms inappropriately. So it's an everyday conversation, and it's not just that word in particular. As you said, it's the LGBT community that we have to support as well. Anything that's derogatory, that's directed and meant for harm, there are consequences attached to that piece of it. But there's no doubt the things that happened at Southwoods this year have absolutely impacted the culture that David talked about earlier, and we're doing everything in our power to regain trust with our families and our students. And it really takes individual conversations. So I would certainly extend to any of my families that if you're ever still concerned or want to have that dialogue, those that I've been able to communicate with directly one-on-one and have those conversations, they've always ended in a positive light because we truly are, and we don't get into this business to harm kids ever, but we're also humans and we can make mistakes as well. And hopefully, my goal always is to learn from that and not repeat certainly what occurred. And that's learning that I had to have, so there's good topics. And what I appreciate is our families, because I know for a fact that our parents are when we send out the messages that aren't the best, right? Like, we had a flight because of XYZ. I think what's really improved us the most is the families sitting down with their students and saying, tell me about it. Tell me what's going on in the social medias. What's your involvement been? How do you feel about that? Because I know those conversations have taken place and have had an impact on our student body. So I extend a thank you to everybody, because this isn't just David's job or my job or our staff's job. This is all of us having to try to come to terms with something that I think is a challenge for this particular generation right now.
And Mitch, Mitch mentioned something that I did not mention in my opening piece around that the reality of society, and that is how social media has changed the entire landscape of education. Well, it's changed the landscape of everything. But in terms of education, we have oftentimes kids, and I see it even in adult behavior, where it's appropriate to capture an image of somebody without their knowledge. They feel it's appropriate to send that out so that everybody can see that image or those images. And then there's also this idea that it's appropriate to find humor at the expense of somebody without even their knowing. And that is such a challenge because it becomes a distraction. And now all of a sudden, like Mitch said, that kids have now found a way to edit and to dub in, to make something appear which is not real. And then all of it, and how does that impact the learning environment? And how does that distract from the learning environment that we are trying to create, that engagement, focus on learning and focus on those essential life skills. Now, all of a sudden, one post can totally upend a school climate for days. And, and what results as a result of that. So, just making sure that we're aware of what our kids are doing and their social media platforms that they use, Snapchat, Instagram, all of those pieces, TikTok. And I'm sure everybody has heard about the TikTok challenges that has plagued schools this year, and how has that impacted our culture and our climate? From the vandalism that took place in the month of September, and then the TikTok challenge about hitting a teacher in October. It's just holy smokes. So again, that social media piece that has had such an impact on the learning environment within schools.
Yeah. The most recent.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitch.
Well, I was going to say, I was looking at some of the questions. Mark brought up a question about why are some instances, a letter would be sent out to folks and those sorts of things. And the only way I can describe that is from my standpoint is it's where and how many students were impacted by that scenario. So, for example, we did have an altercation that happened on our bus concourse that it was at the end of the school day. I would say over half of our student body was out in the space witnessing what was occurring. So those are instances that we would want to get some type of a message home, because we want parents to be able to know what occurred, what's there. And to your point, I've had to send more letters at the beginning of the school year than I've ever had to send ever, because of this, that I will say it was our racially charged scenarios that were playing out in the challenges that those brought forth. So for me, it's how many kids were impacted. Now, sometimes we have, and I would say on daily, we're navigating conflict, okay? And conflict can just be boyfriend, girlfriend broke up and we're having a hard time today, and our counselors manage that. You're not going to hear about some of those smaller events, but it's the larger events that many of our student body either witnessed or probably weren't part of, but could have seen things happening. And what kind of response did the building have to have? So that's kind of how I answer that question. I don't know if it's good. Are there consequences always for any type of harassment, altercations, those types of things? Absolutely, yes, there is. And I don't know if you're questioning if it's 1 to 5 days. Every situation potentially has a board policy that we have to follow, both David and I. Then there's others that, there's areas there, but I at least try to stay, and I know David does too, try to stay consistent with specific activities. Like if you do this on social media, you target somebody, you use a slur, this is what the consequence is. Those don't get advertised though to everybody. That's private information for students. When a parent or when a family, when I need to send something home, it's because it happened in front of a large audience. Hope that answers that.
Thanks, Mitch. I want to quick circle back to a question that aligned with the conversation of phones and social media, but also just access with phones. So one of the parents was asking about, would we consider having students put phones in a caddy or not have them on their person when they're in the classroom? And I don't know, has there been discussion of that one way or the other, a reason why
Absolutely.
We do or don't?
Yeah, so I can speak for Valley. I know that probably over half of our teachers do use the phone caddy system, where they have a number and each student is assigned a number. And at the beginning of class, they just put it in there. The teacher makes sure that, and you pretty much take attendance by the phone caddy to see, what phone is missing and that. So, but some teachers are trying to teach students about the appropriateness and that time and place appropriateness for phones. We're trying to raise our children to be adults. And part of that is treating them like adults. Whereas, I'm going to trust that during instruction, you're going to have your phone away. And then when there's free time, if there's time at the end of the period where you can get your phone out, then that will be the time that you can take your phone out. So we do use the phone caddy system. A lot of our teachers do. Some teachers started the year off without it, but then they realized, I had to put, this time to put the phone in the caddy. The problem is that, this is during lunch, they have their phones. Before school, during passing period, they have their phones. It's only in class that they're required to put their phones in the phone caddy.
Yeah, and we do something similar. We kind of a 1, 2, 3 program. Like it's and the teacher gets to kind of move the arrow where it is. Like today, phones are allowed during this activity, or nope, they have to be totally away, or only when it's appropriate and there's a break or that time in the classroom. This is a challenge. There's no doubt, because just like any rule that you have, there's going to be those that follow it perfectly, and there's then that goes the challenge. We've had some dynamics, unfortunately, in our building where we've had the caddy situation, and then all of a sudden one of the phones ends up missing because it's not perfectly secured. So now who's responsible for that? And I feel like the building, if we said you got to turn it into us and now it's in our possession, so that has turned some of my staff off. And so that's why I have a handful that do the caddy system, but I always tell people, like, if you're doing that and you're collecting them, make sure that they're in a secure space that nobody could just walk past the door and I want this iPhone 13 instead of my Samsung, whatever. So, because that has happened for us as well. So it's a challenge. I wish we could say no, but I would come back to the statement of, I don't know sometimes where that line is for our parents and for us, because some of our parents, I would ask, well, if you don't want them to have that, you keep it at home, have that be something that they can have at after school. And then the concern is, well, that's how I get a hold of them. That's how I know what's going on. I try to rebut that with, we do have office phones. We got phones all over the building. We'd still be able to communicate if necessary. So it's kind of it's a catch-22, but we don't have a great solution yet.
Thanks, you both. A question that came on early on when you were speaking initially, David, was talking about great information that you shared, but wondering how you're tracking to make sure goals are met. So that may be something that is specific at each building level or maybe similar. So I'll let both of you answer that.
Sure. Yeah. So we are using a new system called Panorama, and our school improvement goals this year focus on academics, on attendance, and also on behavior, and as well as we're starting to measure those social emotional learning competencies. So in Panorama, that is able to pull from a system called 5 Labs, where we're able to see how many of our students are currently earning a 2.8 grade point average or higher. How many of our students are meeting our attendance goal of being in the building 90% of the time or more. And then we also have a tiered system where there are some which are like that. You think about it like a stoplight. The green light kids are meeting the goals. The yellow light kids are, there's some worry there. Then the red light would be that at risk, where we need to do some serious interventions. One of the interventions is it's called check-in, check-out. So students who have demonstrated that those at-risk behaviors, and a staff member is assigned to that student, where every day we check in with them before school, after school, and then at the end of each period, they ask their teacher to fill out a daily report. It took us a little bit of time to get that up and running, but we just had our meeting on it on Tuesday of this week, and we are going to get that rolling here before Thanksgiving. So that's the main way, is through that Panorama system, where it's able to pull data from 5 Labs to measure where we are with regards to our academics, our attendance, and our behaviors.
Thank you, David. There was a parent that had several questions, and I know we won't get through all of them with our limited time, but there was a quick one that maybe I would throw back to Dr. Remy, and then see if David or Mitch want to jump in. But what is the plan to create a safe learning environment for our students?
Yeah, well, I think you've kind of heard Mitch, David talk about that somewhat already. As we think about our school improvement goals, safety is always a top priority for us as a system, district-wide, whether it's at the elementary level, middle, or high school. Each building, they have different safety committees, so they look at spaces that may cause concern, and depending upon what that is, we take action. And then they also, the PBIS piece, so they look at the data and they look at their behavior data. And if there are, let's say they find that many of the challenging behaviors that they're having happen in the lunchroom, so then they and their team at the building level problem solve around actions and steps that they can take. So it's really specific to a building. But we do have strategies in place that each of our building level leaders are aware of and utilize. And then we also have a district safety committee that they connect with when needed. So I don't know, David or Mitch, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Sure. First of all, Valley's safe, and I feel safe in saying that Southwoods is safe as well. I know that there's been some challenges, and I can only really speak specifically to Valley, but as a building administrator, as the principal of our building, safety is my number one concern, and that is my top priority. One way that I can do my best to make sure we have a safe building, it just comes down to visibility. Each passing period, I'm in the hallways, just saying hi to kids, just making sure everybody's getting where they need to get on time. I know teachers stand in the hallways also greeting kids as they come in the doors. During the lunch hour, administrators are in the cafeteria, just making sure that everything goes well. And you'd be amazed at Valley High School, we have a cafeteria that sits about 600 kids, and it's full for our 3 lunches. And you can speak in a conversational tone with somebody, and it's so well managed. It's so well managed. Our kids do a great job of managing their own behavior, thinking about that social emotional competency around self-management. They do a great job. Now, again, that's not to say that sometimes we don't have some issues. We might have a behavior that needs immediate attention. A few times this year, we have a school resource officer in our building where we feel like, you know what, we might need to pull him into a situation. I know Southwoods has a school resource officer also, and they're just great resources to have. So again, for me, it's just about that visibility piece, being present, knowing the students, knowing when there's hot spots, just when to intervene, knowing who to pull into the office if you need to talk to them. And again, it comes down to that one word that I said before, relationships.
Yeah, thanks, David, for that piece. And I would echo that piece from the standpoint of, like, when I've talked with my families, I can give you the specific details of what led to that situation mostly. And what it is, inappropriate use of social media. If your students in large group conversations where the conversation is turning very negative, and they're staying engaged or they're even participating in that, I would say that's the number one piece that is occurring that causes any kind of conflict in my hallways. The second piece I tell families and students is that be in class. If you're in class, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to even know what's happening, what's going on, because these situations tend to happen outside hallways in non-academic areas and in times when they should be somewhere else. So those are the 2 big components. Know where your kids are on social media. And I tell all of my students, like, you got to keep your network smaller. Like, if you're letting everybody into your networks or into your group conversations, you never know who or what might come about from that situation, or if there could be hurt feelings. I will tell you, and this is where David said, social media has changed this job 100%. I have to have my ear to those types of Instagram, on Snapchat, every single day. Here's how I know when we start turning corners. At the beginning of the year, when things were the toughest, I didn't have students coming to me saying, hey, Mr. Kuhnert, something's happening on the group chat somewhere here, blah, this is what's going on. When students started to take ownership of their 9th grade experience, and that's what changed. We started hearing about those conflicts that were starting, and students that knew that this was going to end badly came to us quickly and said, here's the information that I have. This is what we, and gave us the direction that we needed to go so that we could mediate that conflict before it had to be mediated in the hallways. And I will tell you that is the difference from the early September to where we are now, is our students have stepped up and said, I don't want this environment, and I know where it's coming from, and I'm going to help navigate that. We have a whole group that decided, like, their only mission for access is random acts of kindness. I've got people that step up to our custodian every single day. When 6 kids leave their trays just sitting on the table, they come by and pick it up. Now, I still want that kid that left that tray to figure out, hey, this is your responsibility, not somebody else's. But I'd like to believe that we coach them, David, so that when they get to your cafeteria, man, you got it all figured out at that point in time.
Thanks to both of you. And I know we're right against the time of 1 o'clock. So Stephanie, I'm going to send it back to you if you have any wrap-up comments.
The only thing I have to say is thank you to everyone who attended today. We appreciate you taking time, and also to our presenters. Great job today, and I think you provided a lot of great information. And our next meeting is in January. Keep tuned for that.
Real quick, I did see, I'm sorry, Dr. Remy, I did see a last comment in there with some really specific questions around equity and things like that. And I would love to have a chance. I don't want to take the time right now, but if that parent wants to reach out and ask me those questions, I would love to have them come into the building. We can walk around and I can answer those questions.
Yeah, and if I can just do one kind of, I guess, announcement. So we have board elections just happened. So we have 3 new board members coming on November 22nd. We will have a reception for Dr. Vicki Poole and Liz Brennan, who are moving off the board. So just want everyone to be aware, you're definitely welcome to come. It's at 6:15 p.m. on Monday, November 22nd, and in the board room. So to say thanks to those leaving and welcome to the 3 new coming on board. So thanks, Stephanie.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And this recording will be posted online and shared out for families to view who weren't able to attend today.